Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. I'm excited to talk with David today, who's in Northern Ireland, an area that maybe doesn't get as much press or people aren't as familiar with when they're thinking of taking a trip to Ireland. So welcome, David.
Thanks, April. Glad to join you today.
So what inspired you to become a tour guide and how long have you been doing it?
Okay, well, it's my passion for history. Would you believe I'm actually an accountant by
Oh,
profession, and I am a historian by passion. So about I've been doing it 4.5 years. Initially as a part-time thing to do as I got closer to retirement, I trained and my wife says I'm now getting paid to say the things I've been boring her for years. So I took the opportunity, set up a little business part-time, and then in the last year I've gone full-time. So that's what I do. And it's just a love of sharing the history of my home city of Derry, Londonderry, and Northern Ireland and Ireland, just to anybody who comes along. And we have a fantastic history to share it with people.
yeah. And I have to say the name of the company is Derrie Danders Tours. So where did you come up with that name? It's kind of catchy and
Yeah,
unique.
yeah. It actually took a long time to come up with something that done. Now the dairy is spelled IE. Now normally it's spelled with the Y, but
Mhm.
there's an issue around Derry or Londonderry. The real city's name is Londonderry. There's people call it Derry. There's political issues depending on whether you fall on the Irish or British side of politics. So I wanted to be neutral. So I didn't want to use one of those. And when I did my research, I found out that actually the original city's name in Irish would be Derry. But my background is Douglas. I come from a Scotch background. And when the Scotch people came to Ireland in 1600, the early 1600s, but the very first city in the region was spelled Derry with an IE. So to
Mm.
me, I use a more historically accurate name than possibly Derry or Londonderry with the Y. So that's how that comes about. The Danders is sort of a local word for meaning a leisurely walk. So it's something, if you said, let's go out for a little dander, we're going for a leisurely walk. We're not going to rush ourselves. And it's that sort of thing. So, and it also abbreviates then to DD tours, which is my initials, David Douglas Walking Tours. So there's a lot of things, but I would say I took 6 months to come up with a name that I felt was right. The tour business came quicker after I
Yeah.
got a single name, and there is political issues in the name of the city. And I like to think, well, my tours are non-political anyway. My tours are about history. You sometimes have to touch on politics to understand the history, but you don't have to put a slant on the politics. So
Right.
that's why I do it straight down the middle. So that's how that came about.
No, I like that, and I so relate to that. In doing my genealogy, I realized my great grandmother and her family came from that area. But when I ran the DNA, so it's interesting you touched on the Scottish because when I do my
Yeah.
DNA, it's heavier to Scottish, and I was like, wait a minute, I'd only known about Ireland.
Yeah.
So
Well, quite a lot. Washington always made some famous comment about they won the War of Independence because of the Scotch Irish of Virginia. And like it was the people that came from Scotland, late 1500s, early 1600s, settled in the north of Ireland. And then a lot of them started emigrating from 1704 onwards to America. And a lot of them were very instrumental in the signing of the Declaration of Independence. As at least 10 of them have
oh,
Ulster connections, Ulster being the northern province of Ireland. So quite a lot of them have that. So I have a lot of guests who sometimes visit for genealogical purposes. I'm not a genealogist myself, but I know a lot about it, and I can take them to maybe the graveyards or the churches and that sort of stuff that they're looking for. So it links in well. Quite a lot of people came from the Derry, Donegal, Ulster areas that would now be coming back from America to try and research their ancestors.
yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. And that leads me, you kind of touched on that, but what do you think some of your tours are that are unique compared to other tour companies? Because I didn't even really see any other tours offered in your area.
Yeah. Well, and you come to the city, there's probably two key things that people say you always must do. One of them is walk the Derry walls. The walls were the only completely walled city left in Ireland. And the walls were built between 1613 and 1619. Now, there are walled towns in Ireland still, but there are no walled cities. We're the last of that. So that bit, 400 odd years, is definitely one thing you'd do. You'd want to walk around the walls, and there's a good few guides do that. The other thing would be in more modern history would be from the time of the Troubles, and there's a lot of murals would represent scenes from the Troubles. So the walls and the murals are the sort of the two tick box things
Yeah.
that people have to do. But I like to think I offer so much more. I'd like to think when they do the walls tour with me, they're getting a much better tour. You know, of course, I would say that, wouldn't I?
Yeah,
But
but that's all right.
they're getting a 2 hour tour in depth. And there's not many questions you can ask me that I can't answer, rather than maybe be marched around for 40 minutes quickly to do that. So again, it's coming down to the lingering longer and dandering sort of thing and really getting under the skin. So you've that, any of those I do. I have a street art and murals tour too, where I do look at the political murals. But for me, there's some fantastic modern murals now in the city. You've probably heard, I don't know if you've heard of the TV series, the DerryGirls.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a real big push now, and the information coming from tours in Ireland this year to bring people to Ireland is being the DerryGirls are actually fronting it. So
Oh,
it's a sort of set in the 1990s, kind of close to the end of the Troubles, about the school lives of some girls from Derry. And it's gone viral, as they would say.
yeah.
It's really, really popular. So a lot of people want to visit the city because of it. There's a
Wow.
fantastic new mural to do with it that people have to stop, get a selfie at. But there's so many other modern murals too, and they're all positive, you know. Whereas the political murals do kind of, they're of their time and they're interesting to see, but they kind of take us back sometimes to dark days.
Right.
Whereas the modern murals are much more positive about the future, entertainment and stuff like that. So that's where I focus my stuff on that. So those are sort of the two core tours. But then I branched out into doing what I would say are unique. With the other thing, Northern Ireland, with the campaign we're running is giant experiences, embrace a giant
Hmm.
experience or giant spirit, and that's coming down from the Giant's Causeway, up in the
Yeah.
Northampton coast. So a lot of if you're a branded experience like I am, you can use the Embrace a Giant Spirit logo. And I like to think, I go a bit deeper. So I have a Scotch Irish tour where I tell about the people from Scotland who came, settled in Derry, and then some of them emigrated to America and New Zealand, Australia, and then some of them stayed. And I give the history of that. So that suits a lot of people maybe with a genealogical bent. I
Yeah.
also do another one on the shirt factories. The shirt factories in Derry, at one stage, we were actually the biggest manufacturer of shirts in the whole world.
Wow.
We had 18,000 people of a population of 60,000 involved in shirts. Now we have nothing left. It's all gone.
Nothing. Oh.
Nothing at all. We had a few bespoke ones until quite recently, but they're all now gone. So that was a very important bit of our cultural history. And my mother worked in the shirt factory, so I have a family connection. And if you scratch the surface of anybody in Derry, two generations, all of our grandparents were connected with the shirt factories. So that's quite a unique tour I do then. Links in well with maybe people come and want to know about clothing. Say if they're
Yes.
visiting Donegal for tweeds and linen and stuff. And I'm telling them, well, Derry, we made linen shirts. And there's an interesting story we always tell that during the American Civil War, Derry made the shirts for both the Union soldiers and the
Oh.
Confederate soldiers. They were being
Yeah.
shipped out of Derry to America and then being split up afterwards. So, things like that there. So I also have a musical tour of the city,
Oh,
and I call
interesting.
it my legendary musical mystery tour. And it's based on the fact that we have so much music in our city's culture. In recent times, you had people like some punk rockers like Undertones. You had a guy called Phil Coulter, who's written a lot of important Irish melodies. And every sort of genre of music somebody from Derry, even the great hymn writer, Cecile Frances Alexander. People might not have heard of her, but she wrote All Things Bright and Beautiful. Um, there is a Green Hill Far Away and Once in Royal David City. Those are her three key hymns. And she was the wife of a bishop. And we walked
Mm.
past where she would have lived in one of the tours. So lots of stuff about music. And then my latest tour is my women's history tour. I call it my influential woman of the walled city, or the real Derry girls, because
Right.
all of them are real there. So you have a famous Irish archaeologist, Mabel Cahoon. You have the great hymn writer, Cecil Francis Alexander. We also have Amelia Earhart. And you might
Okay.
say, why is she doing there?
Yeah.
Well, we might, a lot of people don't know, but whenever she flew solo across the Atlantic, she actually landed outside Derry. She didn't intend to. She was flying to Paris. She got a little lost, but she landed outside, about 5 miles outside the city. And so, therefore, the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic landed near Derry. So we have adopted her. She's an honorary Derry girl. And
Yeah.
actually, when you trace some of her history, her family on her mother's side was Scotch Irish from Derry too.
Hmm.
So lots of things. People who then went into politics, in the modern days, also sometimes during the Troubles. So I have a variety of different women that have been very important in Derry's history. So that's my latest tour. Because sometimes people say to me, "What's your favorite tour of the ones that you do?" Well, it's like saying, "What is your favorite child?"
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
they're all, but I suppose the one you do last is probably the most favorite because you know it best as well. And we had famous Irish Derry women also involved in suffragette movement,
Hmm.
also music, and so many other things. It's hard to go into it all. So that sort of thing. And I say there's other things to do, the blue plaques. I don't know if Americans are familiar with blue
No.
plaques. If somebody was born in a certain place or they lived there, they get like a heritage plaque put up on the wall of where their house or building was. And it's a blue color. So it's known as a blue plaque.
Okay.
So I do a tour of all the blue plaques of the city too. And there's about 15 of them.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's not just a matter of just looking at a blue plaque. I have obviously got little visual aids, and pictures of the women or the men involved. And some of them ended up being great poets. For instance, I'm trying to remember the name of the bishop. It'll come to me. It's it's near Berkeley. That's it. Berkeley, California is named after a bishop or Dean Berkeley, who
Oh,
was the
really?
Dean of
Oh.
Derry. He sort of went over and he was a great scholar. And that gave his name to the city and then eventually the university. So sometimes people go and say, I'm from Berkeley. I says, well, the reason you're from Berkeley is because this man gave his name to it. And he was
Right.
the Dean of Derry. So lots of interesting things in the blue plaques for people. And I say there's a couple more I do as well, but I don't want to bore you with it ever. But like at any stage, go onto my website and it's www.derry, spelled Derrie, Danders, Danders.co.uk. And you'll see the full range of tours. And the other one I'm working on, won't be ready this year, is a Second World War tour
Oh.
because Derry was actually very important in the Second World War because
Hmm.
we were the most westerly of the Allied ports. Remember, Ireland was neutral.
Yes.
So we had so many Americans, Canadians, all based in Derry, and they guarded the convoys. And also, a lot of the GIs came over initially, trained in Derry, and then went to England to be then involved in Normandy landings. So there's a great Second World War. The issue with it is there's very little to show people. I have plenty to
Right.
tell you, but there's nothing, unfortunately, left. And I can't say, look, there was a submarine or
Yeah.
whatever. There's nothing there.
Right. Right.
So I have to work on a lot of visual stuff to get ready for that tour, but also a very interesting tour as well, hopefully.
Yeah. And I know right before we got on, you also mentioned that besides leading the walking tours through the city, that you work with people that you would get in their car to kind of get a
Yes.
bigger.
Yeah, and in the last few weeks, one of my main clients have been sort of Americans, maybe doing a tour of Ireland. They've booked a car, sometimes driving themselves, sometimes booking a chauffeur, and he's driving around Ireland. They come to the city, and say, especially if it's a wet day, I can say, "Don't worry, let's go out, and I'll guide you from the car,
Right,
and then we can come and then do a walking tour of the inner area." There's so much to see that's maybe 2, 3 miles outside the city. If you don't have a car, you can't really do it in a walking tour.
right.
So I would offer more like a half day type experience where we would still try and do a 2 hour. You kind of have to allow 2 hours to do the walls, maybe
Okay.
half an hour to do the murals, and then another hour maybe to drive around and get some great panoramic views of the city. So that's proven very, very popular. And again, I say a couple of weeks ago, it was so wet. I had a couple from Chicago, and we ended up at an old graveyard outside the city. And I was saying, like, it was quite busy and stuff. And we were driving around and pointing out certain things. And I said, "I'm sorry, I brought you to a graveyard." And they said, "Don't worry, we love it." And I says, "The only reason we're at this graveyard is because it's wet.
Right.
Never normally think." But they stopped at it and there's great views and they wanted to see some of the old Celtic
Oh
crosses and all that
yeah.
sort of thing. So that's whenever, a silver lining, the bad weather, it was a silver lining for them.
Right, right, exactly. And what some are some of your favorite spots just outside the city or in Northern Ireland? Because I know there
Yeah.
is a lot up there
Oh,
that
there's a lot to say.
people.
Well, the things I suppose most people, if they're coming to Northern Ireland, would do the Giant's Causeway. And the Giant's Causeway, these unusual hexagonal stones. Basically, well, there's two stories behind that. One, there was a famous giant, Finn McCool, built the causeway, but the actual story is probably they're volcanic, and the way the lava came up and it dried quickly. It
Right.
dried into the shape of these hexagonal stones. So they're kind of almost one of the natural wonders of the world. So that would be definitely something most people want to do if you're in the area. There's also a rope bridge a few miles from there called the Carrick-a-Reed rope bridge. People like to walk across it because it's actually quite scary.
Yeah, I know.
I haven't done it for a few years. I did it when I was younger. Now, if I take people to it, I just say, "Don't worry, I'll take your picture. Walk across it. I'm not doing it
Right,
anymore."
yeah.
So the rope bridge is a big thing. There's also so many beautiful beaches, and in the North Coast, you have a lot of links with Game of Thrones stuff. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, a lot of the filming was in some of the beaches and in the caves and other things like that there. And then I think there's a new show out called Vikings, was
Hmm.
filmed in the North Coast too. So Belfast itself, nice city to visit, lots of history in Belfast, but definitely don't miss out in Derry. It's a very walkable city, compact and very friendly. I always say to people, we might fight with each other, but we never fight with guests. So
Right.
don't be worried about that. And I
Yeah.
suppose the other thing about Northern Ireland, the troubles, and there still is little areas where, you don't go into. But
Okay.
again, you know, it's like anything, I suppose, in a lot of inner city in America, you wouldn't go into certain
Yeah.
places. So provided you don't be very unlucky, you're
Right.
unlikely to see anything that would be of concern. So don't let that put you off anyway.
Right, right. So talk a little bit about the food. Are there favorite local dishes that people should try to eat when they're visiting Ireland?
I mean, you probably would say Ireland's not a great food thing. Everything revolves around potatoes. You know,
Right.
one of the local delicacies is a thing called champ,
Hmm.
and it's basically fresh potatoes with scallions or spring onions,
Oh, that
and
sounds
that's
good.
one of the staple foods. So you can get champ along with your steak or your chicken or whatever if you're vegetarian. There's also another one called Kilcannon, and that's a mixture of potatoes and turnips because
Hmm.
these are traditional Irish type stuff. There's some really good seafood too, seafood chowder, and depend on the area of Ireland you go to, there'd be probably either whether it's salmon or trout or
Mm.
whatever. There'd be a lot of good, and even lobsters. A
Oh,
lot of
really?
good
Oh, wow.
seafood in Ireland, and then of course the drink.
Yeah.
Guinness again. Guinness. you'll either love it or you won't. It's not. But there's plenty of whiskey as well. Bushmills in the north coast has it's been a distillery from the 1600s, and so a lot of craft beer. Even in Derry now, we have two craft breweries brewing their own beer, and
Oh,
are all
wow.
giving it names to do with the city and stuff. So you've got a lot of things like that there. You get plenty of good food in Ireland. Put it like that, you won't go hungry. Whether apart from the potato type based stuff and the fish, you could say, well, it's a delicacy I can't get anywhere else. I don't know. We can't compete with the French and the Italians, but you'll not go hungry. I'll tell
Right.
you that.
Right. Yeah,
So,
that's good. Are there festivals or events that happen in Northern Ireland that?
yes, we're quite a few things. In Derry, we have a big Halloween event. We're
Oh,
one of the biggest Halloween events in the world now, in Europe especially. And the city shuts down almost for a week and they do parades and stuff like that there. So you have big events in that. And then at other times you have jazz festivals, music festivals. If you come around the 12th of July, you will have the orange parades, and stuff like that there when that there. But you can avoid that anyway if it's not your scene. But other times of the year, in there we have the Clipper Festival, where there's a round the world Clipper race, Clipper yachts,
oh,
and
okay.
they finish off quite close to us, as well. So in the city, like even over Easter, we're having a passion play thing over the next few days, where it's like live actors walking around, a modern day take on the passion play. So that's actually coming out in the next couple of days. So there's always something happening. Belfast has the reputation of being a real music city,
Mm.
as well. We in Derry think we're just as good, but yes, music's a big thing on the scene in Belfast too, if you like music, and they have lots of different festivals too. I say there's probably a time of the year they have an oyster festival in some bits.
Oh.
Another time of the year they probably have a whiskey festival. So before you go and the area you're going in, they just go onto one of the local council websites and see, is there anything running that would tie in with your plans to visit.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you have a favorite time of year for visitors to come to Ireland?
Um, Probably spring or autumn, really. Summer gets a wee bit busier. I think if you want the place a wee bit quieter to yourself,
Yeah.
sort of from mid-March to April, and then possibly from mid-September to mid-October would be a good time. The weather's still reasonably good, and you'll have a bit more time. Sometimes if you went in the peak time, like the Derry Walls can be very crowded.
Oh,
If you
yeah.
have maybe 10 or 20 buses to send, maybe a couple of cruise ships, everybody there has to do it in that short period of time. Whereas you come off season slightly, or at the beginning or end of season, you can walk around and have it to yourself and really enjoy the experience. So I would say that would be my favorite times for you people to come.
Yeah. And spring is beautiful because it's so green. I mean,
Exactly. Everything is so green. Well, it's because there's a lot of rain. That's the main reason. And the one thing, don't, wear proper clothing. Expect it to rain. And if it does, again, I had people from, I think it was Arizona a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying, "Oh, I'm sorry about the weather," and they go, "We love it. We haven't seen rain
right.
for."
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I says, if you get it for all 2 weeks of your holiday, you might have a different attitude. So expect rain and plan and do it. And if you don't get it, all well and good.
Right,
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of dry in many parts of the United States over here. So that's what it's been many years since I went to Ireland, but that's what I remember just how green it is, just this
yes.
vibrant green. It was almost unbelievable. But what is something you hope visitors take away from their experience with you visiting Ireland?
Well, I hope to take away positive things that we have moved on as
Right.
as a culture. At the end of the day, we now we can respect each other's traditions, and there's nothing wrong with having the belief of having a United Ireland. There's nothing wrong with having the belief to stay British. They're perfectly legitimate things, but we don't resort killing each other
Yeah.
anymore. Not that ever ordinary people, it was certain organizations. But I want to say that there's the positives and the friendliness of the people. Say, come and visit, stay. Don't come and just tick boxes. Don't come. I think one of the problems I feel sometimes Americans have is they've no idea of time in Ireland. You
Yes.
know, they might stay be in Bushmills, which is 40 miles from here, me, and say, oh, we can be with you in half an hour. You do the 2 hour tour. We will go to Enniskillen then for lunchtime. And I say, hold on here. Irish roads, you need to allow for an hour and a half to get places. And you're going to come in and do a quick hour here. And you're going to regret it because you're not going to see it. So
Yeah.
give yourself time. Don't be rushing around. I must see, I must see, I must see. Go and stay a wee bit. Pick the ones that you think you want to stay longer at, you know, and stay there and enjoy it and embrace it rather than just trying to pile in too much and not getting the right experience.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important for a lot of travelers. And I don't know where that mentality came from, but I see that too. I think they go on Instagram or the internet and they just think, "Oh, I got to get here and I got to go there," and they're not going to get to have conversations, meet
No.
Irish, listen to music, pop in a pub. Like you mentioned, I'm sure there's a lot that goes on in the evenings that if you just dash through and you'd
Yeah,
miss all that.
you miss out. No, we have some fantastic restaurants, fantastic hotels, and then most of the bars, certainly at weekends, at this time of the year, you're getting live music. And then as we get close to the summer, probably most of the bars will have live music every night, you
Oh,
know.
wow.
And so you pick your choice whether you want something, rock and pop, or you want something traditional, Irish folk and whatever. So yes, no, take your time and be prepared to stay and talk to the people and learn that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David. Tell our listeners again where they can find your website, book a tour,
Yeah,
all of that.
certainly. So if you use social media, Derry Danders new walking and audio tours, I'm on most platforms. I also have a range of audio tours. These are sort of ones you download onto your phone and you don't need me. So they're a wee bit cheaper. They're not as good as the real thing, obviously. But if you're only in town for a couple of hours, think about a Derry Danders audio tour. But otherwise, go onto my website, www.derrydanders.co.uk, and then you can either email me from that if you say you wanted a bespoke tour, something put together, or you can buy one of the more standard tours. Now, most of my tours are private because I like to give the one-to-one attention, but I can take up to groups of maybe 15 people on one of the private tours. But once you get beyond that, quality suffers. So, but at other times I run public tours where you could book a spot just on a public tour if you're happy to do that. But my suggestion is, especially if you're coming and you want to get underneath the skin of it, book a private one-to-one tour for your group or your family, and I can show you and make lots of recommendations. And do it early on your visit. Do the
Yeah.
tour early because then I'll be pointing out the things for you to do when you're there. And I say, give yourself time. And when you come to the city, allow yourself at least a day, 2 days, rather than a lot of people do Derry as a stopping point for what the Wild Atlantic Way, Donegal, which is beautiful, or the North Coast, which is equally beautiful. But we deserve more than just 2 hours in between the two slots. And a lot of customers after my tour just say, why did we only allow ourselves this 2 hour stopover? And I said, well, I'm asking you that question too.
Yeah.
Don't be prepared, and it's worth it to stay a bit longer and be prepared. And maybe some people's attitude that it might only get to Ireland once in my life, so if I cram in as much, better to cram in a bit less and do it right and come back another time. You
Yeah,
know,
I agree. And also reach out to David too, before you get to Ireland, because I'm sure David
certainly.
has great recommendations for maybe places to stay or, planning your route so that you aren't just passing through and then realizing, oh, I should have allowed more time to spend in
Yeah.
Northern Ireland. So thank you so much, David. This has been really enlightening, and I'm looking forward to getting back to Ireland, definitely.
Certainly, I don't think you regret it, and I think there's plenty of Americans just bursting to get back over to Ireland too.
Yes.
So, hopefully we can cope with you all.
How have the spring flowers started to pop out?
Yes, the daffodils and snowdrops were kind of last month, and even the daffodils have sort of almost gone. There's a few cherry blossoms, apple blossoms are now kind of happening. So yeah, now the next 2 or 3 weeks are going to be nice and bright times to come, and hopefully the weather um, is a wee bit better than it is now. It's a wee bit damp and cold just for Easter at the moment, but hopefully it improves a wee bit.
Right. Well, thank you again so much, David.
No problem.